British cargo.
This was a city that the British were going to relish attacking.
The loss of Baltimore would hurt and could tip the balance of war.
The fear was great that if Baltimore fell, then Philadelphia and New York City were going to be next.
If the eastern cities tumble, the American government would follow. But they won't go down without a fight.
They were itching for payback for what had happened in Washington. They wanted to stick it to the British.
Civilians dig defensive trenches. They barricade access to the port. 700 guards ring the city borders. And any attack would have to get past the star-shaped bastion at the mouth of the harbor, Fort McHenry. In the summer of 1813, the fort's commander, Major George Armistead, ordered a weapon of intimidation, one that would strike fear into the enemy's heart and bring cheers from the defenders: a new flag.
Our flag so large that the British would not mistake it. It was an act of defiance.
The local flag maker was Mary Pickersgill.
Most of the flag makers are women, and one of the things that may have helped a lot of women go into that profession is sea captains didn't tend to own property until they retired from the sea. And so the women were running boarding houses and making the flags, and that the captains would take out to sea with them when they left.
Flag making ran in the family. Pickersgill's mother, Rebecca Young, made flags for George Washington at the same time as Betsy Ross. A generation later, Mary's own daughter Caroline worked with her on the Star-Spangled Banner. A receipt reveals that Pickersgill charged $405.90, though much of the money went toward the materials.
An economist has actually estimated that what Mary Pickersgill was paid for the flag was probably 1/3 the cost of the house she lived in. And if you put that in modern standards, it's an incredibly expensive piece of material.
Mary, Caroline, and 3 assistants created this flag. 2 centuries later, right back in Baltimore, it took 150,000 stitches to recreate the flag by hand to fly over modern-day Fort McHenry.
We had air conditioning. We had a room that was big enough to lay out the flag. You know, Mary Pickersgill, she's working by candlelight. She's working by, whatever sunlight she can get at those times of day.
The original flag is here, in a custom-designed low-light chamber at the National Museum of American History. Today, the flag's curator and conservator are inside the chamber. They are methodically examining every section of the 200-year-old flag for the first time in 8 years.
Color's still about the same difference. We're not seeing any loose fibers around, so that's all good.
No textile in the world, except possibly the Shroud of Turin, is the subject of as much scrutiny, research, and expertise.
Okay, this is good. This is your next area of concern. See the very light areas in the stars where they're white compared to everything else? That's probably been bleached by chemical action, maybe with a mold.
Do we know why that ended up being like that?
It looked to me like the area had had mold damage previously. I don't see any new splits, which is really good, because some of the stars are pretty burnt from the acid damage. So I think we're okay on that.
The waffling that we're still seeing is from the previous treatment, correct?
Some of it, some of the 1914 treatment holes are starting to close over too, which is good.
100 years ago, the cutting-edge flag conservation approach was called the Fowler method.
That was the kind of conservation treatment of the time that was done for textiles, particularly fragile textiles. We have tons of flags in our collection that also had Fowler treatments on them. She patented this kind of stitching pattern.
Fowler's approach was overkill. She could have gotten the same result using 70% fewer stitches. In 1998, the Smithsonian team set out to remove all of them.
It took us about 9 months to take out 1.7 million stitches from the flag. Long time doing that.
As they freed the flag from Fowler's linen backing, impressions of those stitches remained.
Not only did they put the stitches in, but they also ironed it. They ironed those waffles or that texture, that honeycomb texture, into the textile itself.
But as the years pass, the fabric is starting to loosen up.
It used to look like a tapestry, and now it actually looks like a flag once again.
There are mysteries about this flag the curators wish could be unlocked.
Wow. With that light, it really looks like it's puckering in the area where there's the lost star.
I do wish I knew where the missing star went. There's a lot of theories out there. We don't know where it is. We have a number of fragments from the flag in our collection. If anybody has any, yeah, we're always interested in accepting those kinds of donations. It's the bicentennial of this flag, and it would be nice to find more information about some of those missing pieces.
For 34 years, the banner hung in the museum's main hall. Out in the open, it was a magnet for pollution.
There were a lot of oils on it that were continuing to deteriorate and were speeding up the deterioration.
Using dry sponges and a gentle solvent, conservators released the grime from the fibers.
It was really gratifying to see how much soil came out and how the colors started to brighten. It would almost feel like the flag was coming back to life again.
Clean and separated from its backing, the true flag is revealed. So are the scars of a long life. Insect damage, corrosion, probably from an iron buckle, 37 different patches, even a few autographs.
An object can actually speak to you by showing you its story through wear and tear and soils and things like that, and how it's constructed.
It looks like it's holding up pretty well. I'm not seeing anything.
8 years hanging up on the man.
All right, I'm gonna get off for a while, go breathe some oxygen.
Our mission is that we hold this relic for future generations so that Americans 100 years from now understand the significance of this object. It's a very happy flag right now in its new chamber.
Today they make flags out of nylon, but the Star-Spangled Banner is made of cotton and wool gauze. Family Heirloom Weavers in Red Line, Pennsylvania is Hollywood's go-to for authentic-looking historic fabrics. These machines can create a nearly exact replica of the Star-Spangled Banner fabric.
That flag was 30 feet high and 40 or 45 feet long, and if that would have been out of real heavy fabric, it wouldn't have unfurled. It would have just hung there.
The shuttle is thrown back and forth mechanically, but the banner's loom was likely operated by women or even children. Ironically, the fabric probably came from England.
We don't find a lot of records of wools being sold in Baltimore. So we think it probably came through other channels.
It may have been stolen by privateers or smuggled past the British Navy by blockade runners. On September 12, 1814, British ships of war approached the port of Baltimore.
In the entire Royal Navy, there were 8 bomb ships. 5 of them were sitting there in the Patapsco River. These are the most powerful siege artillery afloat.
They were not supposed to get that far. Shoals of mud should have grounded the heavy vessels.
But the British are magnificent sailors and managed to get the ships up anyway, which a lot of folks in Baltimore had not thought would be possible.
On board one of these British warships, an American, Francis Scott Key.
Talk about a witness to history. He finds himself in Baltimore Harbor just prior to this battle.
A respected attorney, Key is there to negotiate the release of a client, Dr. William Beans. Beans was arrested for capturing British soldiers after the Battle of Bladensburg.
He was deemed an enemy of the British state, and he was in captivity aboard one of the British ships.
Key brings evidence that convinces British commander Robert Ross to set Beans free. But they're not allowed to leave.
British commander said, "Oh no, you and your friend Dr. Beans are now hostages because both of you know our target. As soon as we've captured Baltimore, you will be released."
The British strategy is two-pronged. First, Commander Ross lands a battalion of 4,000 north of the city.
At breakfast, he rashly predicted, "Tonight I will sup in Baltimore or in hell."
They meet heavy resistance in the form of 3,000 American troops. The British drive them back, but Commander Ross doesn't make it.
A sniper's bullet tore through his right arm, lodged in his chest.
Mortally wounded, he is carried on a stretcher through columns of advancing troops.
They put his corpse in a hogshead of rum, there to swish and sway in a dark spirit until his interment in Canada.
The Americans inflict heavy damage to the British front lines, but are overtaken. Like in Bladensburg, some break and run under fire. The next day, on the river, guns begin to sound for the naval assault on Baltimore. Fort McHenry is armed with 56 French naval guns. They have a maximum range of 1.5 miles. But they are no match for British mortars that can fire with accuracy from 2 miles away.
The British could sit from 2 miles out and lob shells at the fort all day long.
Safely out of range, British ships pound the fort with fire.
There's no cover, and they've got this cascade of these terrible, terrible whining shells landing in and around the fort.
Key's ship is in the thick of it. He has a front row seat.
He's in this unique position, actually, with the British ships, watching the outcome. It's hard for me to imagine what it would have been like to be on that ship, essentially surrounded by the British sailors and the British Navy.
It was so accidental. He was simply doing his job.